The cold that day wasn't just in the air. It was a deep, biting thing that seemed to have crawled inside my bones and decided to stay there forever. We were somewhere near the Belgian border, tucked into a line of trees that looked like skeletal fingers reaching out of the snow. I remember looking at my hands, and they didn't even look like mine anymore. They were gray, cracked, and shaking so hard I could barely keep my grip on my M1 Garand. People talk about bravery like it's something you just reach for, like a tool in a belt. But that morning, my belt was empty. I was 20 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was completely, utterly paralyzed by the thought of dying. We had been told to take a small farmhouse about 300 yards across an open, snowy field. There was a German machine gun nest in the loft, and they'd been pinning down our guys for 2 days. The order came down, we were going to charge it. It was a suicide mission. Everyone knew it. Even the trees seemed to be leaning away from that field, like they didn't want to see what was about to happen. I looked at the men around me, 15 of them, including my best friend, a kid from Ohio we called Birdie, because he was always whistling. They were all waiting for the signal. My heart was hitting my ribs like a trapped animal. I felt a sickness in my stomach that had nothing to do with the rot-tasting rations we'd been eating. It was the weight of the end. I knew, as sure as I knew my own name, that if I stepped out into that white expanse, I wasn't coming back. And I didn't want to die. I just didn't want to die in that godforsaken field for a farmhouse that didn't matter. The sergeant, a man named Miller who had a face like hammered copper, looked at me and nodded. It was time. He blew the whistle, a sharp, shrill sound that sliced through the muffled silence of the snow. I saw Birdie jump up. I saw the others start to heave themselves out of their foxholes, but I didn't move. My legs weren't mine anymore. It was like they were made of lead, rooted deep into the frozen earth. I just sat there, huddled in the dirt, my eyes wide and my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Miller yelled something at me, his voice lost in the sudden roar of the wind, but I couldn't respond. I was a coward. In that moment, I accepted it. I was a coward who just wanted to see his mother again, who wanted to sit on a porch in Indiana and drink a glass of cold water. The others saw me stay down. They hesitated. That's the thing about a squad. You move as one, or you don't move at all. When the guy next to you doesn't jump, your own instinct to survive kicks in twice as hard. Birdie looked back at me, his face pale, his eyes asking me what was wrong. He stepped back down into the cover of the tree line. One by one, the other 14 men followed his lead, sliding back into the shadows, confused and terrified, waiting for me to take the first step. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Miller was furious. He crawled over the snow toward me, his boots kicking up white powder, his face twisted in a snarl. He grabbed me by the collar of my field jacket and pulled me upward, his breath hot and smelling of stale coffee and tobacco. He called me every name in the book. He threatened to court-martial me, to shoot me himself right there in the ditch. I didn't care. I just looked at him with these dead, watering eyes and shook my head. I couldn't do it. I told him my legs wouldn't work. It was a lie, and yet it was the absolute truth. I was physically capable of standing, but my spirit had just quit. It had packed its bags and left me hollow. The other men were watching this play out, their own fear mirrored in my breakdown. They were using my cowardice as an excuse to stay alive for just one more minute, and I knew it. Miller let go of me, disgusted, and turned to the rest of the squad. He was about to give the order again to force us all out into the meat grinder when the world suddenly turned into fire. The farmhouse we were supposed to charge, the one with the machine gun nest, vanished in a series of massive, ear-splitting explosions. It wasn't our artillery, it was theirs. A German 88 battery, miscalculating the coordinates or perhaps aiming for a perceived American advance that wasn't there yet, had leveled the entire position. They had zeroed in on the very spot we would have been standing if I hadn't frozen. If I had been brave, if I had followed that whistle, we would have been exactly halfway across that field when those shells landed. There wouldn't have been enough of us left to bury. We all sat there in the sudden ringing silence that follows a barrage, watching the black smoke rise against the white snow. Miller didn't say a word. He just sat back on his heels, his hand still trembling where he'd let go of my jacket. Birdie was staring at the crater where the house used to be, his mouth hanging open. We stayed in that tree line for an hour, nobody speaking, nobody moving. We were 15 men who were supposed to be dead, and the only reason we were breathing was because I was too scared to be a soldier. I've carried that for 80 years. It's a strange thing. living your life on the back of a failure. I went home. I married a girl named Martha. I worked at the post office for 35 years. And I raised 3 children who think their father is a hero because he wears a veteran's cap on Veterans Day. But every time I look in the mirror, I don't see a hero. I see that 20-year-old kid shivering in the mud, failing his friends, failing his country, and somehow through some cruel joke of the universe, saving everyone in the process. People like to think that things happen for a reason, that there's some divine plan, but all I saw was luck. Bad luck for the guys in that farmhouse, and the strangest kind of good luck for us. I remember the smell of the Cowardice that day. It's a sharp, metallic smell that sticks in the back of your throat. Even now, if I'm near a 4th of July celebration and I smell the fireworks, I'm right back in that ditch. I can feel Miller's hands on me. I can see Birdie's confused face. Birdie didn't make it home from the war. He died 3 weeks later in a skirmish near Cologne. But he got 3 more weeks of life because I was a coward. He got to write 2 more letters to his girl back in Ohio. He got to eat 1 more hot meal. I tried to tell myself that those 3 weeks mattered. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. It was funny, in a way that isn't really funny at all, how the rest of the war went for me after that. You'd think I would have found some reserve of courage, or maybe that the guilt would have driven me to do something spectacular. But it didn't. I just became more careful. I became the man who checked his equipment 3 times. I became the man who listened a little too closely to the wind, trying to hear the whistle of incoming mail before anyone else did. The men in the squad never talked about it. They never thanked me, and they never teased me. They knew. They knew that my weakness had been their salvation, and that's a heavy thing to hold over someone's head. We shared a secret that was coated in shame and gratitude. We'd sit around the fires at night, sharing a smoke, and the air would be thick with the things we weren't saying. I remember Miller specifically. He survived the war too. I saw him at a reunion back in '72. We stood by the buffet table, both of us older, graying, our bellies a bit softer. He looked at me, really looked at me, and he just nodded. He didn't say thank you for being a coward. He just said, "Good to see you, Lawson." That was enough. The guilt is a funny thing. It doesn't stay the same size. Some days it's a pebble in your shoe, just a minor annoyance as you go about your business. Other days it's a mountain on your chest. I think about the German boys in that farmhouse. They were probably just as scared as I was. They were probably sitting up there in that loft, blowing on their hands to keep them warm, thinking about their own mothers in Berlin or Munich. And then, in a blink, they were gone, blown apart by their own side. I wonder if their families ever found out what happened, or if they just got a telegram saying their sons were missing in action. The randomness of it all is what gets to me. In war, you're taught that if you do everything right, you might live. You're taught that discipline and courage are your shields. But I did everything wrong. I broke the most basic rule of being a soldier. I disobeyed a direct order in the face of the enemy. And yet, here I am, 92 years old, sitting in a comfortable chair with a quilt over my knees, while better men are nothing but dust in a foreign field. I remember the trek back from that line of trees. We were ordered to fall back since the primary objective had been destroyed by the accidental barrage. Walking back through the snow, my boots felt like they weighed 50 pounds each. Every step was a reminder that I was still moving, still breathing. I looked at the backs of the men in front of me. I looked at the way their packs bounced, the way their helmets sat tilted on their heads. I knew the shape of their shadows. I had memorized the way they walked because I expected to see them fall. When we got back to the command post, Miller reported that the objective was neutralized. He didn't mention the hesitation. He didn't mention that I'd stayed in the hole. He just said the 88s hit the house and we moved back. He protected me. Or maybe he was protecting himself, or the whole squad. If word got out that a whole squad refused to move because one private got the shakes, it wouldn't have looked good on his record. So we all lived a lie. We became a squad of ghosts, walking through the rest of Europe, waiting for the debt to be collected. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I think about the concept of a hero a lot. We see them in the movies, don't we? The man who runs toward the fire, the man who saves his buddies while the music swells. But what about the man who stays in the hole? What about the man whose fear is so great it acts as a dam, holding back a flood of tragedy? Is there a word for that? I haven't found one in 92 years. My grandson asked me once if I killed anyone in the war. I told him I didn't know. It's the standard answer veterans give when they don't want to talk about it. But the truth is, I don't think I did. I spent most of my time trying to disappear. I spent most of my time trying to be the smallest target possible. I wasn't there to win a war, I was there to endure it. That morning in the Ardennes was the peak of my endurance. It was the moment the rubber snapped. I often wonder what would have happened if I had been a different man. If I had been the kind of guy who grew up on stories of glory and actually believed them. I would have been the first one out of that ditch. I would have been screaming some battle cry, my heart full of purpose. And I would have been vaporized. My children would never have been born. My grandson wouldn't be asking me questions. There would just be a name on a stone in a cemetery in France, and maybe a flag folded up in a box in my mother's attic. The winter of '44 was the coldest on record, or at least it felt that way. The mud would freeze into these jagged ruts that would twist your ankles if you weren't careful. We slept in holes we dug ourselves, often with just a piece of canvas over the top to keep the snow off. You'd wake up and your breath would be frozen to the collar of your coat. We were miserable, we were hungry, and we were constantly, perpetually afraid. But that fear was different from the one I felt at the farmhouse. The daily fear was like a low-grade fever. You just learned to live with it. The farmhouse fear was a seizure. It was total. I remember the sound of the snow crunching under Miller's boots as he walked away from me after the explosions. It was such a small sound, so mundane. It didn't fit with the violence we had just witnessed. I think that's what haunts me more than the explosions themselves. The way life just carries on. The way the snow kept falling, slowly covering the black char of the farmhouse, as if the earth was trying to hide what had happened. It didn't care about my cowardice or the 15 lives saved. It just kept turning. I didn't tell Martha for 40 years. We were sitting on the porch one evening. The fireflies were out, and the air was thick and sweet with the smell of cut grass. Out of nowhere, I just started talking. I told her about the farmhouse. I told her I was a coward. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just reached over and took my hand. Her hand was warm and soft, the complete opposite of what I remembered from the war. She told me that she didn't care why I came home, only that I did. She said that if my fear was what brought me back to her, then she was grateful for it. It was a kind thing to say, but it didn't change the way I felt. It didn't change the fact that I hadn't earned my life. Every day since 1945 has felt like I'm spending someone else's money. I'm living on borrowed time, bought with a currency of shame. I look at my kids, I look at my great-grandchildren playing in the yard, and I see the faces of the men who didn't come back. I see Birdie. I see a dozen others whose names have faded, but whose eyes I still see when I close mine at night. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. There was a man in our company named Henderson. He was a big guy, a logger from Oregon. He was the bravest man I ever knew. He'd go out on patrols like he was going for a walk in the woods back home. He ended up getting a Silver Star for pulling 3 guys out of a burning tank under heavy fire. Everyone looked up to him. He was the ideal. I remember looking at him after the farmhouse incident and wondering if he knew. He never said anything, but he had this way of looking through you, like he could see the gears turning in your head. A week after the farmhouse, we were pinned down in a gully. Henderson was the one who crawled out to scout the position. He didn't come back. We found him later, just a quiet figure in the snow. He did everything right. He was brave. He was selfless. He was a leader. And he died. I did everything wrong. I was selfish, I was weak, and I was a follower. And I lived. There is no logic to it. There is no justice in a trench. You can be the best man in the world, and a piece of stray metal will find you just as easily as it finds the worst man. That realization, that my survival was completely uncoupled from my merit, is a hard pill to swallow at any age. But at 92, it's the only thing I have left to chew on. Sometimes I think about the 15 men. I wonder how many of them realized what had happened. I wonder if they ever told their families. I'm alive because Lawson was too scared to move. It's not the kind of thing you brag about at the VFW. It's not the kind of thing you put in a memoir, but it's the truth of war. It's messy, it's ugly, and sometimes the mistakes are the only things that save you. I remember the way the light looked that afternoon, after the smoke cleared. It was a pale, weak sun, hanging low in the gray sky. It didn't provide any warmth, but it made the snow sparkle in a way that felt almost insulting. How could something so beautiful happen in a place so terrible? I've spent a lot of time thinking about the system, the way we organize ourselves into armies and nations, the way we decide who lives and who dies based on maps and ideologies. When you're in a foxhole, none of that exists. There is no nation. There is no matrix or system. There is only the man to your left and the man to your right, and the cold reality of the metal flying through the air. The system wanted us to charge that house. The system wanted 15 dead Americans and 5 dead Germans. My cowardice was a glitch in that system. It was a refusal to play the part that had been written for me. And for that, I suppose, I should be proud. But I'm not. I'm just tired. I remember the first meal we had after that day. It was some kind of hot stew, though I couldn't tell you what was in it. We sat in a cellar of a ruined building about 2 miles back from the line. We ate in silence. The only sound was the clinking of spoons against metal tins. I couldn't taste a thing. My mouth felt like it was full of ash. Birdie sat across from me. He kept looking at me, then looking away. Finally, he leaned over and whispered, "Thanks, Henry." That was it. He didn't explain what he was thanking me for. He didn't have to. I didn't say anything back. I just kept eating my stew, feeling the warmth of the bowl against my frozen fingers. That was the moment I realized that my shame was their life. I had traded my dignity for their heartbeats. It's a trade I've had to make every single day since. People talk about the greatest generation like we were all giants. We weren't. We were just kids. We were scared, we were lonely, and we were often very, very small. I was the smallest of them all that day. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The road to Germany was long. It felt like we were walking across the entire world. Every village looked the same. Shattered brick, charred timber, and the hollowed-out eyes of the people left behind. You stop seeing them after a while. You have to. If you let yourself feel for every person who lost everything, you'd never be able to pull the trigger when you had to. I became very good at closing myself off. I think that started at the farmhouse. That was the day I realized that my internal world, my fears, my desires, was more important to me than the mission. It's a dangerous way to think in a war, but it's the only way to stay human. Most of the guys who really bought into the glory of it didn't make it. They were the ones who took the risks. They were the ones who became the heroes we read about. But the ones who survived? A lot of us were just like me. We were the ones who hesitated. We were the ones who stayed in the shadow of a wall a second longer than we should have. We were the survivors of our own instincts. I remember a specific night in March of '45. We were nearing the Rhine. The air was starting to turn, just a hint of spring underneath the rot. I was on sentry duty, standing in a doorway of a house that had no roof. I was looking up at the stars. They were so clear out there, away from the city lights, away from everything. I thought about how those same stars were over Indiana. I thought about how they didn't care about the war. They didn't care about the borders or the tanks or the 120,000 characters of a man's life. They were just burning. It made me feel small, but in a good way. It made my cowardice feel small too. In the grand scheme of the universe, whether 15 men lived or died in a field in Belgium didn't matter one bit, but it mattered to those 15 men. It mattered to their wives and their kids. It mattered to the people they would eventually become. I'm the only one left now. Out of those 15, I'm the last man standing. They've all gone to their graves one by one over the decades. Heart attacks, cancer, old age. I've been to many of their funerals. I stood there at the gravesides, listening to the bugle play taps, and I felt that same cold wind from the Ardennes. At Birdie's funeral, he was brought back after the war and buried in his hometown. I met his mother. She was a tiny woman, dressed in black, with eyes that looked like they had cried all the tears a person could possibly have. She took my hand and asked me if Birdie was brave. I lied to her. I told her he was the bravest man I ever knew. I told her he led the way, that he never hesitated. I didn't tell her that he had once climbed back into a hole because his friend was too terrified to move. I gave her the hero she wanted, even if it wasn't the son she had. Maybe that was my way of paying him back. I gave him a legacy of courage to cover up the 3 weeks of life I had stolen for him. It's a heavy thing, lying to a mother. But in a war, the truth is often the most cruel thing you can give someone. We give them stories instead. We give them medals and citations and neatly folded flags. It's the only way we can live with what we've done or what we've failed to do. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The thing about being 92 is that you start to see the patterns. You see how one tiny moment, a whistle, a shake of the head, a frozen leg, can ripple out across decades. If I had been brave, 15 families wouldn't exist right now. There are probably 50 or 60 people in the world today, children, grandchildren, who only exist because I was a coward. It's a strange kind of math. How do you weigh a man's honor against 60 lives? I don't have the answer. I don't think anyone does. I just know that when I close my eyes, I still see that farmhouse. I see the flash of the shells. I see the black smoke, and I feel that terrible, wonderful paralysis. I'm finally telling this story because I don't want to take it to the grave. I don't want the last thing I remember to be a secret. I want people to know that sometimes the worst part of you is the part that saves you. I want people to know that the system doesn't always know what it's doing, and that sometimes being a glitch is the only way to stay alive. I was a coward. I disobeyed an order. I failed my duty, and I saved 15 men. I've lived with that for 80 years, and I think finally I'm okay with it. I remember the day the war ended for us. We were in a small town in Germany, and the news came over the radio. People were cheering, some were crying. There was wine coming out of cellars we didn't know existed. But I remember feeling a profound sense of emptiness. The war was over, but the farmhouse was still there, in my head. It didn't end for me. It never really ends. You just learn to build a life around the ruins. You plant some flowers, you fix the roof, you try to ignore the smell of smoke. I've lived a good life. I've been a good father, a good husband, a good neighbor. But I've always been Henry Lawson, the man who stayed in the hole. And maybe, in the end, that's enough. Maybe being human, with all our fears and failures, is the most brave thing any of us can ever be. I look at my hands now and they're shaking again, but this time it's just the age. The cold is finally gone. I'm ready to go now. I've said my piece. I've let the secret out, and the world is still turning. The snow is still falling somewhere. And the 15 men? They're waiting for me. I think we'll have a lot to talk about. The transition from the battlefield to the living room is a strange journey. You spend months or years learning how to be a hunter, how to be prey, how to sleep with one eye open and one hand on a trigger. And then one day, they give you a piece of paper and a suit and tell you to go back to being a person. It's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. I remember sitting in my parents' kitchen a week after I got home. My mother had made a roast, and the smell of the kitchen was so rich, so full of peace, but I couldn't sit still. I kept looking at the windows, checking the angles. I kept listening for the sound of a whistle. My father asked me how it was over there. I just told him it was cold. How do you explain to a man who's never seen a farmhouse explode that you're only alive because you failed at your job? You don't. You just eat your roast and you say thank you. You learn to smile when people call you a hero. You learn to tuck the shame into a corner of your heart where the light doesn't reach. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember a specific dream I've had for years. I'm back in that tree line. The whistle blows. But in the dream, I get up. I run. I feel the wind on my face. I feel the strength in my legs. I'm the hero everyone thinks I am. I'm halfway across the field and I can see the farmhouse clearly. I can see the German machine gunner looking through his sights. And then the shell hits. In the dream, I feel the heat. I feel the world go black. And then I wake up sweating in my bed in Indiana, with Martha sleeping soundly beside me. I lay there for hours, listening to her breathe, and I realize that the dream hero is dead. He's been dead since 1944. The man who is alive, the man who is lying in that bed, is the coward. And I have to choose, every single night, which one I'd rather be. I always choose the coward, because the coward gets to hear his wife breathe. The coward gets to see the sun come up. It's a selfish choice, I know. But it's the choice we all make deep down, whether we admit it or not. I think about the concept of regrets of the end of life. People usually regret the things they didn't do, the chances they didn't take. But my biggest regret is the thing I did do, even though it had a good outcome. I regret that I wasn't the man I was supposed to be. I regret that I let my fear win. But then I look at the photos on my mantle. I look at my daughter's wedding, my son's graduation. I look at the face of Miller and Birdie and the others. And the regret starts to feel like a very small price to pay. We live in a world that demands we be one thing or the other, brave or cowardly, good or bad, hero or villain. But the truth is, we're all just a jumble of contradictions. We're all just trying to make it across the field. Some of us run, some of us crawl, and some of us stay in the hole. I'm finally okay with being the one who stayed. I'm finally okay with the fact that my cowardice saved 15 men. It wasn't a noble act, but it was a human one. And in a world of machines and systems and maps, being human is the only thing that really matters. I remember a time years later when I went back to Europe. It was the 50th anniversary of D-Day. I didn't go to the big ceremonies with the presidents and the kings. I took a train to Belgium. I found that field. It wasn't hard to find. The farmhouse had been rebuilt, a sturdy stone structure with cows grazing in the yard. The tree line was still there, though the trees were much larger now. I stood in the spot where our foxholes used to be. It was summer and the grass was long and green. There was no snow, there was no fire. There was just the sound of the wind in the leaves and the distant lowing of a cow. I stood there for a long time, just looking at that field. I tried to see the 15 men. I tried to see myself, but they were gone. The earth had reclaimed everything. The fear, the shame, the luck, it was all buried under the soil. I realized then that the war doesn't belong to the places where it happened. It belongs to the people who carry it. It belongs to me. And as long as I'm alive, that farmhouse is still exploding. As long as I'm alive, that whistle is still blowing. But once I'm gone, it finally stops. The system finally resets. And that's a comfort in a way. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember my father's hands. He was a carpenter, and his hands were always covered in small scars and sawdust. He never went to war, but he knew what it was to build something from nothing. He taught me that you have to respect the materials you're working with. You can't force wood to be something it isn't. I think that applies to people too. You can't force a man to be brave if his soul is made of glass. You have to work with what you have. I was made of glass that morning. I shattered. But sometimes, when things shatter, they fall in a way that blocks the path. They fall in a way that saves the people behind them. I think my father would have understood that. He would have looked at the 15 men, and he would have looked at me, and he wouldn't have judged the glass for breaking. He would have just seen the result. I've tried to look at myself with those same eyes. It's taken 90 years, but I think I'm getting there. I'm sitting here now, in the quiet of the late afternoon. The light is turning that golden color that always makes me feel a bit nostalgic. I can hear the sounds of the neighborhood, a car door slamming, a dog barking, a child's laughter. It's all so normal, it's all so precious. And I think about how fragile it all is, how easily it could all have been different. If I had been just a little more courageous, none of this would be here. My grandson is coming over later to help me with the garden. He's a good kid. He has my eyes, they say. I look at him and I think, you're here because I was afraid. I'll never tell him that, of course. He doesn't need to carry that weight. He just needs to know how to plant the tomatoes. He just needs to live his life. And that's my victory. That's my medal. Not a piece of silver on a ribbon, but a boy in a garden who doesn't know the sound of a whistle. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I spent a long time thinking about the matrix, that idea that we're all just cogs in a machine. In the army, that's exactly what you are. You're a serial number, you're a rank, you're a body to be moved from point A to point B. The machine doesn't care if you're scared. It doesn't care if you have a mother in Indiana or a girl in Ohio. It just wants the objective taken. When I didn't move, I jammed the machine. I was the grit in the gears. And for a few minutes, the machine stopped. It failed. And in that failure, 15 human beings were allowed to remain human beings. They weren't cogs anymore. They were just men in a tree line, scared and cold and alive. There's a certain power in that, I think. A certain dignity in refusal. Even if that refusal comes from a place of weakness, it's still a no to the machine. And sometimes, no is the most important word you can ever say. The silence that followed the farmhouse explosion is something I'll never forget. It was a physical weight. It was the sound of destiny shifting. I remember looking at the snow falling into the crater. It was so peaceful. The fire was orange and black, and the snow was white and pure. It was a beautiful, terrible sight. I think that's when I realized that the world doesn't care about our labels. It doesn't care about coward or hero. It only cares about what is. And what was in that moment was that 15 men were alive who shouldn't have been. I've lived my life in the shadow of that what is. I've tried to be a man who is worthy of the life I didn't earn. I've tried to be kind, to be honest, to be present. I've tried to make the most of every day, even the ones that are hard, because I know better than anyone what it costs to have another day. I remember a conversation I had with a chaplain a few months after the war ended. We were waiting at a port to be shipped home. I didn't tell him the whole story, but I asked him if a man could be forgiven for not being brave. He looked at me with these tired, kind eyes and said, "Henry, God doesn't ask us to be heroes. He asks us to be faithful." I didn't know what that meant at the time. I thought I had been unfaithful, but now I think I understand. I was faithful to the life within me. I was faithful to the instinct to survive, and by extension, I kept the others faithful to it too. It's not the theological answer I was looking for, but it's the one I've lived with. We are all just custodians of the breath inside us. We have a duty to keep it going as long as we can. I think about the 120,000 characters of a life, all the words spoken, all the thoughts held tight. If you could put a life on a scale, which moments would weigh the most? Would it be the medals, the promotions, or would it be the moment you stayed in a hole? For me, the hole is the heaviest thing I have. It's the anchor of my entire existence. It's the center around which everything else revolves. I'm 92 years old, and I'm finally ready to let the anchor go. I'm finally ready to just be Henry Lawson without the coward attached. Or maybe I'm ready to embrace it. Maybe I'm ready to say, yes, I was a coward, and look at the beauty that came from it. Look at the families. Look at the children. Look at the life. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The light is almost gone now. The room is falling into shadow. I can see the outlines of my books, my chair, the photos on the wall. It's a quiet life, a simple life, and I am so grateful for it. I hope that whoever is listening to this understands that it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to not be the hero of the story. Sometimes, the most important thing you can do is just stay where you are. Sometimes your weakness is exactly what the world needs. I don't know if there's a heaven or a hell, but if there is, I hope I get to see Birdie again. I hope I get to see Miller. I think we'll sit in a tree line somewhere where it's not cold and there are no whistles, and we'll just watch the snow fall, and we won't have to say a word. We'll just be alive, and that will be enough. It will finally be enough. The war changed us all, of course. Some men came home and never spoke again. Others couldn't stop talking, as if the words could push back the memories. I fell somewhere in the middle. I spoke, but I didn't say the things that mattered. I talked about the food, the mud, the boredom. I didn't talk about the farmhouse. I didn't talk about the terror. But now, as the end approaches, I find that the things I kept secret are the only things worth saying. They are the only things that feel real. The rest of it, the post office, the mortgage, the yard work, it's all just the scenery. The farmhouse is the play. The farmhouse is the truth. I've lived 92 years, and if I've learned anything, it's that we don't get to choose our moments. They choose us. And when they do, we don't always act the way we thought we would. We don't always act the way the movies say we should. We just act. Or in my case, we don't act. And the world changes anyway. I'm not a hero. I never was. I was just a boy who wanted to live. And by some miracle, that was enough to let 15 other boys live too. I can live with that. I can die with that. I think in the end, that's all any of us can ask for. To be okay with the story we've written, even the parts we tried to hide. To be okay with the person we turned out to be. I am Henry Lawson, and I am a coward, and I am the luckiest man alive. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember the feeling of my boots on the American soil when I finally got back. It was May of '46. The air was warm, and the ground felt solid in a way that European ground never did. I remember thinking, I made it. But even then, standing on that pier in New York, I felt a twinge of that old guilt. I looked at the men around me. Some were missing limbs, some were staring into space with eyes that didn't see the skyline. And there I was, whole and healthy, because I hadn't done what I was told. I felt like a thief. I felt like I had stolen my own life from the hands of the war. It's taken me decades to realize that you can't steal what is given to you by chance. You just have to decide what to do with it. I decided to live. I decided to build a life that was worth the theft. I decided to be a man who was kind because I had seen so much cruelty. I decided to be a man who was patient because I had seen how quickly everything can be taken away. I decided to be a man who cherished his family, because I knew how many families were broken in that field in Belgium. If my life was a mistake, I wanted it to be the best mistake possible. I wanted it to be a mistake that produced goodness. And looking around this room, looking at the life I've built, I think I succeeded. I think the mistake was worth it. I can hear my grandson's car pulling into the driveway. It's time for me to go. It's time for me to stop looking at the past and start looking at the garden. There are tomatoes to be planted and a life to be lived. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me share this burden. I feel lighter than I have in 80 years. The farmhouse is gone. The whistle is silent. The snow has stopped, and I am finally, truly home. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I wonder if the German soldier who was behind that machine gun ever knew. I wonder if he survived that day, or if he was one of the ones who didn't. I wonder if he had a grandson too. I hope he did. I hope we both made it through in our own broken ways. I hope the world we left behind is better because we were too tired or too scared to keep fighting. It's a nice thought anyway. A world built on the failures of soldiers. A world built on the moments when we chose life over duty. I think I'll hold on to that thought as I walk out to the garden. It's a good thought to end on. A good thought to carry into the evening. Goodbye, and take care of yourselves. And remember, it's okay to be afraid. Sometimes it's the only thing that saves us. The garden is quiet today, but the soil under my fingernails feels exactly like the grit of that Belgian field. It's funny how 80 years can pass, and yet a simple sensation like cold mud can bridge the gap in a heartbeat. After the farmhouse was leveled, after we realized we were all still breathing, the world didn't just return to normal. We didn't just pick ourselves up and keep going like nothing had happened. There was a shift in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. We were a squad of men who had seen a ghost, the ghost of our own deaths. Miller, our sergeant, never officially disciplined me. He never wrote me up for cowardice or for disobeying that whistle. I think, in his own way, he was processing the same impossibility that I was. He had been ready to lead us to our graves, and my failure had robbed him of that duty. Or maybe it had gifted him his life, and he just couldn't find the words to say it. We spent the next several days moving in a sort of daze. The adrenaline that had kept us sharp during the earlier months of the invasion had soured into something heavy and dark. I remember we took shelter in a bombed-out schoolhouse about 5 miles east of that field. The desks were all splintered, and there were pages from textbooks scattered everywhere like confetti. I sat in a corner, my back against a wall that was missing its top half, and I watched Birdie. He was trying to light a cigarette, but his hands were shaking so bad he kept dropping the match. I wanted to reach out and help him, but I couldn't move my own hands. We were all broken in ways that didn't show on the skin. In the system of the army, a soldier is a tool. You are meant to be used until you are spent, and then you are replaced. But in that schoolhouse, looking at those men, I saw the truth. We weren't tools. We were just boys who had been dressed up in olive drab and told that killing and dying were the highest honors we could achieve. I started to despise the uniform then. I started to feel the weight of the lies we'd been told back in training. They don't tell you about the smell of the cordite. They don't tell you about the way a man's face looks when he realizes the bravery he was promised is just a fancy word for being the first one to get hit. Birdie eventually got his cigarette lit. He took a long drag and looked at me through the smoke. His eyes were red-rimmed and sunken. He looked like he hadn't slept in a decade. He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. We were tethered together by that moment in the tree line. If I had been the man the army wanted me to be, Birdie wouldn't have been sitting there. He'd be a memory, a name on a list sent back to a grieving mother. Every breath he took felt like a weight on my shoulders. I felt like I owed him something, or maybe he owed me. It's a strange, tangled feeling to know that your greatest failure is the reason your best friend is still warm. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The winter dragged on, and the cold became our constant companion. We moved through the Ardennes, through forests that seemed to go on forever, and through villages that were nothing more than piles of rubble. I became a master of the glitch. I learned how to look like I was following orders while always keeping one eye on the exit. I wasn't trying to be a hero anymore. I was just trying to keep my squad alive through a series of small, calculated hesitations. If Miller told us to advance, I'd be the one who noticed the wire on the ground, or the one who suggested we take the longer, safer route around a ridge. I used my fear as a compass. I realized that the things that scared me were usually the things that were meant to kill us. The system wanted us to move fast, to be aggressive, to overwhelm the enemy. But my fear told me to move slow, to be quiet, to survive. And strangely, the men started to listen to me more than they listened to the officers. They saw that the guys who were fast and aggressive were the ones being carried back on stretchers. There was a day in late January when we were ordered to clear a small patch of woods near the Siegfried line. The Germans had dug in deep, and our tanks couldn't get through the trees. It was infantry work, the kind of work that eats men. We were lined up, waiting for the order to move into the dark undergrowth. I could feel the familiar cold crawling up my legs. I could feel the panic starting to bubble in my chest. But this time, I didn't freeze in a hole. I looked at Miller, and I could see that even he was reaching his limit. His face was gray, his eyes hollow. I leaned over to him and whispered, "Sarge, if we go in there like they want, we're not coming out. Look at the way the snow is disturbed over on the left. They're waiting for us to funnel in." Miller looked where I was pointing. He didn't see anything at first, but then he saw it. The slight glint of a barrel, the way the shadows didn't quite match the trees. He held up his hand, signaling the squad to halt. We waited. 10 minutes, 20. Suddenly, a mortar barrage from our own side hit that exact spot on the left. The woods erupted in fire and splinters. If we had moved when the order came, we would have been right in the middle of it. That was the second time. Miller didn't scream at me this time. He just looked at me with a tired, knowing expression. He knew that I wasn't being brave, and I wasn't being a strategist. I was just a man who was too afraid to die. And that fear was making me see things that the brave men missed. We were surviving on the margins of the war, living in the gaps between the orders and the reality on the ground. I started to think of us as a group of ghosts already. We had died at the farmhouse, and everything since then was just a long, slow walk toward the end. But the more I looked at the men, the more I saw them starting to believe in the luck of Henry Lawson. They stayed close to me. They watched where I put my feet. They waited for my nod before they moved. It was a heavy burden, being the mascot for survival when I felt like a fraud every second of the day. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. By the time we crossed into Germany, the war had changed. The Germans were desperate, and the system on both sides was breaking down. We were seeing old men and young boys in uniform, people who had no business being in a war. I remember capturing a group of them in a cellar outside of Aachen. There were 5 of them, none older than 15. They were shivering, their oversized helmets slipping down over their eyes. I looked at them, and I didn't see the enemy. I saw myself in that Belgian ditch. I saw the same raw, naked terror. One of the boys started to cry, a high, thin sound that broke my heart. Miller wanted to hand them over to the MPs, but I knew what would happen. They'd be processed, put in a camp, and probably treated like animals. I looked at the boys, then at Miller. I didn't say a word. I just pointed toward the back of the building, toward the woods that led away from our lines. Miller sighed, looked away, and lit a cigarette. The boys didn't need to be told twice. They ran. They disappeared into the trees like frightened rabbits. That was the 3rd time I failed my duty. I let the enemy go. I disobeyed the rules of engagement. But as I watched those boys run, I felt a piece of my own soul come back to me. I realized that the war only works if we all agree to be monsters. The moment you decide to be a human being, the war starts to crumble. My cowardice, my fear, my refusal to play the part, it was all a way of staying human. I was protecting the 15 men in my squad, but I was also protecting the boy I used to be. I didn't want to go home as a man who had killed children. I didn't want to carry that on top of the shame I already felt. I think Miller felt it too. We were all just trying to get through the day without losing the last bits of ourselves. The matrix of the military, the grand narrative of victory and sacrifice, was a lie. The only truth was the heartbeat of the person next to you. As we moved deeper into the heart of Germany, the carnage became almost too much to bear. We saw the aftermath of the bombings, cities that had been turned into ash and bone. The smell was something you never get out of your clothes. It's the smell of a civilization ending. We walked through the ruins like scavengers, looking for food, looking for a place to sleep that wasn't damp with death. I remember sitting in a cathedral in Cologne, The roof was gone, and the stained glass was shattered on the floor like spilled jewels. I picked up a piece of blue glass and held it up to the sun. It was so beautiful, so out of place in all that destruction. I thought about how much effort it takes to build something like a cathedral, and how little effort it takes to blow it up. We are a destructive species, I realized. We build these systems and these ideologies just so we have an excuse to tear each other apart. And the only thing that stands against that destruction is the individual who refuses to participate. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I spent a lot of time in those ruins thinking about the 15 men. They were still with me, still breathing, still complaining about the rations and the cold. We had become a family, but a family built on a foundation of silence. We never talked about the farmhouse. We never talked about the German boys I let go. We just existed in the present, moving from one broken building to the next. Birdie was my shadow. He never left my side. I think he knew that if he stayed close to the coward, he might actually see Ohio again. He'd talk about his girl, Sarah, and the farm he wanted to buy. He'd describe the smell of the hay and the sound of the crickets on a summer night. I'd listen to him, and I'd pray that my fear would be enough to get him there. I'd pray that I could keep failing just enough to keep him alive. The end of the war was strange. There was no grand finale for us, no final battle where we saved the world. It just stopped. One day the shooting was everywhere, and the next day there was a weird, ringing silence. We were in a small village near the Elbe River. The sun was out, and for the first time in months it felt warm. We sat on a stone wall, watching the German civilians come out of their hiding places. They looked at us with a mixture of fear and relief. I saw an old man come out with a tray of apples. He walked up to Miller and offered him one. Miller took it, nodded, and handed it to me. I took a bite of that apple, and the sweetness of it was so intense I almost cried. It was the first thing that had tasted like anything other than metal or mud in a year. We were the victors, they told us. We had won, but I didn't feel like a winner. I just felt tired. I felt like a man who had been holding his breath for a long time and had finally been allowed to exhale. When it came time to ship home, the squad started to break up. Men were sent to different processing centers, assigned to different units for the occupation, or sent home on different ships. I remember the day Birdie left. He came over to me, his pack slung over one shoulder. He looked different. He was thinner, older, but there was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there in Belgium. He didn't say thank you again. He just reached out and gripped my hand. He squeezed it so hard it hurt. "See you in Indiana, Henry," he said. I watched him walk away, a small figure in a sea of olive drab. I never saw him again. He made it back to Ohio. He married Sarah, but he died in a car accident in 1952. It was a stupid, senseless way to go after everything he'd survived. It made me realize that you can beat the system of the war, but you can't beat the system of life. Eventually, the bill comes due for everyone. But those years he had, those 7 years of being a husband and a farmer, those were mine. I had bought those for him with my cowardice. And that's a legacy I can live with. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I went back to Indiana and tried to be a person again. It wasn't easy. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced the room was filling with smoke. I'd jump at the sound of a car backfiring. I'd look at the people in the grocery store and I'd wonder what they would have done in that ditch. Would they have been brave and died? Or would they have been cowards and lived? I realized that the civilian world is just another kind of matrix. It's a place where we pretend that everything is orderly and safe, where we ignore the darkness that lives just beneath the surface. I couldn't ignore it. I had seen what happens when the veneer of civilization is stripped away. I had seen how fragile we all are. It made me a bit of an outsider, even in my own family. I was the quiet one, the one who didn't go to the parades, the one who didn't tell war stories at the dinner table. I was the man who kept his secrets in a box in the back of his mind. Martha was the only one who ever saw the cracks. She knew that I wasn't just quiet. She knew that I was haunted. She didn't push me to talk, but she stayed close. She was my new squad. She was the person I looked to when the world felt like it was starting to dissolve. We lived a simple, honest life. I worked at the post office, delivering letters and packages, a cog in a much gentler machine. I liked the routine. I liked knowing that the only thing I was responsible for was making sure a letter got from one house to another. It was a penance in a way. a way of balancing out the destruction I had witnessed. For every building I had seen blown up, I wanted to deliver 1,000 letters that built things up, messages of love, of business, of connection. It was my way of being a human being in a world that often forgets how. I'm 92 now, and the world has changed so much it's hard to keep up. Everyone is connected, everyone is shouting, everyone is trying to be a hero in their own little story. I look at the news and I see the same patterns repeating, the same systems of power trying to convince young men that dying for a flag is the greatest thing they can do. I want to scream at them. I want to tell them about the farmhouse. I want to tell them that your life is the only thing you truly own, and that the system will take it from you the moment you let it. I want them to know that it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to say no. It's okay to be the coward who saves his friends. We need more cowards, I think. We need more people who are too terrified of the consequences to pull the trigger. We need more people who are willing to jam the gears of the machine with their own humanity. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I think about Miller a lot these days. He was the one who held the whistle. He was the one who had the power to end us all, and he chose not to. He chose to let my failure stand. In a way, he was the bravest one of us all. He had to live with the fact that he didn't follow his orders. He had to live with the fact that he allowed a coward to lead his squad. I wonder if he ever felt the same shame I did, or if he realized, as I have, that he did the only thing that actually mattered. He brought his men home. That's the only true victory in a war. Everything else is just politics and propaganda. I hope he found peace before he died. I hope he knew that I never blamed him for the whistle, and I never thanked him enough for the silence that followed it. The light is fading from the garden now. My grandson will be here soon. He's a young man, full of energy and dreams. He looks at me and he sees a hero. He sees the medals in the box, the old photos, the history. He doesn't see the kid in the mud. He doesn't see the paralysis. And that's okay. I'm finally okay with being the hero he needs, as long as I know the truth myself. I'm finally okay with the fact that my life is a beautiful, complicated mistake. I've lived 92 years on borrowed time, and I've tried to make every minute count. I've loved, I've lost, and I've survived. And in the end, that's all any of us can do. We are all just glitches in a system that doesn't care about us. Our job is to make those glitches as big and as bright and as human as possible. I can hear the gate clicking shut. That'll be him. He always whistles when he comes up the walk. It reminds me of Birdie. Every time I hear it, I smile. It's a sound of life. It's a sound of a world that kept turning because one boy was too scared to let it stop. I'm going to go out there now and help him with the tomatoes. I'm going to feel the dirt under my nails and the sun on my face. And I'm going to be grateful for the fear, for the farmhouse, and for the 15 men who are still with me, even if they're only in my head. We made it. We really made it. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember another moment, right before we crossed the Rhine. We were staying in a farmhouse, a real one this time, not a ruin. The family had fled, leaving everything behind. There was a piano in the parlor, covered in dust. One of the guys, a quiet kid from New Jersey named Santini, sat down and started to play. He played something soft and classical. The music filled the house, drifting out into the cold night air. We all just stood there, listening. For a few minutes, we weren't soldiers. We weren't targets. We were just men listening to music. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated matrix failure. The war didn't exist in that parlor. The hatred didn't exist. There was only the sound of the notes and the breath in our lungs. I think about that piano a lot. I wonder if it's still there. I wonder if the family came back and found it. Maybe still slightly out of tune from Santini's touch. I hope they did. I hope they found something beautiful in the middle of all that ugliness. That's what I've been trying to do for 80 years. Just find the music in the middle of the noise. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I've talked a lot about the system and the matrix, but the truth is, we are the ones who build them. We are the ones who give them power, and we are the ones who can take it away. Every time you choose kindness over cruelty, every time you choose life over duty, you are breaking the system. You are being a coward in the eyes of the machine, but you are being a hero in the eyes of humanity. I hope you remember that. I hope you remember that your life is precious, and that the choices you make, even the ones that feel like failures, can have ripples that last for generations. I'm the proof of that. 15 families are the proof of that. A 92-year-old man in a garden in Indiana is the proof of that. My grandson is out there now, ripping the plastic off the bags of mulch, and every time the plastic tears, it sounds like a boot stepping on frozen crust. It's funny how your mind never really lets go of the sounds. You spend 60 years trying to bury them under the noise of the suburbs, the lawnmowers, the television, the hum of the refrigerator, but they're always there, just beneath the surface, waiting for a quiet moment to crawl back out. People ask me if I have nightmares. I tell them no, because a nightmare implies it's something that isn't real. For me, the war isn't a dream. It's a parallel life I've been living alongside this one. I'm here in Indiana, but I'm also always there, in that tree line, watching the snow fall on a house that's about to disappear. I think about the system a lot. You hear people talk about it today like it's some big invisible machine controlling everything. Well, back in '44, the machine was very visible. It was painted olive drab and it smelled like diesel and wet wool. It told us that our lives were property of the US government. It told us that our fear was a crime. But sitting here at 92, looking at the long shadow of my life, I've realized that my fear was the only thing that was truly mine. It was the only part of me the army couldn't take, couldn't train out of me, and couldn't use for its own ends. My cowardice was my last piece of freedom. I remember a time in late February, just as the thaw was starting to turn the world into a soup of gray mud. We were moving through a small village in the Rhineland. The houses were skeletal, their ribs showing through the plaster. We found an old man sitting in a rocking chair in the middle of the street. He wasn't moving. He wasn't even looking at us. He was just staring at a spot on the ground where a shell had cratered the cobblestones. Miller wanted to move him, to get him out of the way so the deuce-and-a-half trucks could get through. I walked up to him, and for a second I saw my own father in his face. Not because they looked alike, but because they had the same look of total, exhausted resignation. I realized then that the system didn't just break the soldiers. It broke everyone. It ground the world down into dust and then asked us to celebrate the victory. I stood there, looking at that old man, and I didn't feel like a liberator. I felt like an intruder. I felt like I was part of the machine that had ruined his life. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. That feeling of being an intruder never really went away. Even after I got home, I felt like I was walking through someone else's life. I'd go to the movies with Martha, and I'd see these newsreels of the boys coming home, the ticker tape parades, the cheering crowds. I'd look at the screen and I'd think, who are those people? Because they didn't look like the men I knew. The men I knew were tired. They were quiet. They had eyes that looked like they'd seen the end of the world and were still trying to figure out why they were still here. There's a certain kind of loneliness that comes with surviving something you weren't supposed to. It's a wall between you and everyone who wasn't there. You want to tell them, you want to explain what it felt like to be in that ditch, to feel your soul quit on you, but there are no words for it in English. There are only the silences. I spent years cultivating those silences. I'd sit on the porch for hours, just watching the cars go by, and Martha would bring me a glass of iced tea and just sit there with me. She never asked me what I was thinking. I think she knew that if I started talking, I might never stop. Or worse, I'd realized that I had nothing to say that wouldn't break her heart. I think about the 15 men and the lives they led. After Birdie passed in that car accident, I made it a point to keep track of the others as best I could. There was Santini, the piano player. He went back to Jersey and opened a music shop. He sent me a Christmas card every year until 1988. Then the card stopped. I looked it up later. He'd passed away in his sleep. I thought about him sitting at that piano in the ruined house, the music cutting through the war. Did he remember that night the same way I did? Or was it just another blur of exhaustion for him? Then there was Miller. He stayed in the army for a few more years, then became a high school history teacher. Imagine that. A man who lived through the real thing, standing in front of a chalkboard, trying to explain the causes and effects of the war to a bunch of teenagers who just wanted to go to the malt shop. I wonder if he ever told them about the farmhouse. I wonder if he ever told them about the private who saved his life by being a coward. I doubt it. The system doesn't like those kinds of stories. It wants stories about sacrifice and duty. It doesn't want stories about the messy human mistakes that actually keep people alive. The truth is, history is a curated thing. It's a museum where they only show you the polished artifacts and the heroes' portraits. They don't show you the mud. They don't show you the shaking hands. They don't show you the moment a man decides that he doesn't care about the objective, he just wants to see the sun come up. I've lived 92 years, and I'm finally realizing that the cowardice I've been carrying like a stone is actually the most honest thing about me. It's the proof that I wasn't just a cog. It's the proof that I had a soul that was capable of being terrified. And that terror is what saved those men. If I had been brave, if I had been the perfect soldier, 15 families would be missing their fathers and grandfathers today. There's a profound irony in that. My greatest failure as a soldier was my greatest success as a human being. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember a trip I took to Washington, D.C. in the late 90s. My son wanted to take me to the World War II Memorial. It's a beautiful place. The pillars, the fountains, the gold stars. It's grand, it's imposing. It's exactly what the system thinks war should look like from 50 years away. I stood there, looking at the names and the dates, and I felt nothing. It felt like a stage set. It didn't have the smell of the Ardennes. It didn't have the biting cold that gets into your marrow. It was a monument to the idea of the war, not the reality of it. My son asked me what I thought. I just told him it was very big. He looked disappointed, like he was waiting for me to say something profound or to salute the wall. But you don't salute a memory that's been sanitized. You salute the men. And the men weren't there. They were in the dirt in France, or they were in nursing homes in Ohio, or they were sitting in gardens in Indiana trying to forget. I walked away from the memorial and sat on a bench near the water. I watched the tourists taking pictures and laughing. They were so disconnected from the violence that had paid for their afternoon. And I realized that I was glad for it. I was glad they didn't know the sound of a whistle. I was glad they didn't know what it was like to feel their legs turn to lead. That's the real victory, I suppose. Not the territory gained or the treaty signed, but the fact that a whole generation can grow up and treat a war memorial like a backdrop for a photo. It means the system didn't get them. It means the machine stopped before it could grind them up. I sat there and I felt a strange sense of peace. I hadn't been a hero, but I had contributed to this peace by simply refusing to die. By being a coward, I had kept the spark of life going for 15 men, and they had passed it on to their children and their children's children. Sometimes I think about the concept of the Matrix, that idea that we're living in a world designed to keep us compliant. In the war, the Matrix was the propaganda, the orders, the belief that we were part of something larger than ourselves. When I stayed in that hole, I unplugged. I saw the wires. I saw that the larger something didn't care about Henry Lawson. It didn't care about Birdie. It was just a process. And once you see the process, you can never go back to being a happy part of it. You become a glitch. I've been a glitch for 80 years. I've been a man who knows the secret, that the world is held together by the moments when people choose themselves over the machine. It's not a popular secret. People want to believe in the myths. They want to believe that we're all part of a grand design. But the design is just something we make up afterward to make the chaos feel meaningful. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. My life has been long, but it feels like it's all been lived in the wake of that one morning. Everything I've done, every letter I delivered, every meal I ate, every time I held Martha's hand, it was all a result of that paralysis. I think about the sheer weight of time, 92 years. It's a lot of minutes, it's a lot of breaths. And yet, if you asked me to describe my life, I wouldn't tell you about the 40 years at the post office. I wouldn't tell you about the vacations or the retirement parties. I'd tell you about the snow in Belgium. I'd tell you about the sound of the German 88s. I'd tell you about the way Miller's hand felt on my collar, because that was the moment my life actually began. Everything before that was a prologue, and everything after was an epilogue. The core of me is that 20-year-old kid in the mud. I'm finally telling this because I'm tired of the wait. You carry a secret for 80 years, and it starts to feel like a physical burden. It bows your back, it makes your heart heavy. By sharing it, I feel like I'm finally letting the men in my squad go. I'm letting Birdie go back to his farm. I'm letting Santini go back to his piano. I'm letting myself be human. I want you to understand that it's okay to be imperfect. It's okay to fail. Sometimes your failures are the most important things you'll ever do. Don't let the world tell you that you have to be a hero. Don't let the system define your worth by how well you follow orders. Your worth is in your breath, in your heartbeat, and in your refusal to be anything other than what you are, even if what you are is terrified. The sun is lower now, and the shadows of the trees are stretching across the lawn like the fingers I saw in the Ardennes. But they're not scary anymore. They're just shadows. My grandson is coming toward the house now, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. He's tired, but he looks happy. He's done a good day's work. I'm going to stand up even if my legs are stiff, and I'm going to go out there and meet him. I'm going to tell him he did a good job. I'm going to be the grandfather he thinks I am. But I'll know that the reason I can stand here today is because once, a long time ago, I chose to stay down. And that's the most important thing I've ever done. I remember a letter I got about 15 years ago. It was from a woman in California. She was the daughter of one of the men in my squad, a guy named Peterson. He'd been a quiet fellow, a bit older than the rest of us. He'd passed away, and she was going through his things and found an old photo of the squad. My name was written on the back. She wrote to tell me that her father always spoke of me with a kind of reverence. He told her that I was the one who kept them all grounded, the one who had a knack for keeping them out of trouble. She wanted to thank me for being such a good friend to him. I sat at my kitchen table and cried for an hour after I read that. I had spent all those years thinking of myself as a coward, as a failure. But to Peterson, I was the one who kept them alive. To his daughter, I was the reason she existed. It was the first time I realized that my shame was someone else's gratitude. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. It's a strange thing, how we perceive ourselves versus how the world sees us. We are our own harshest judges. We focus on the moments we broke, while everyone else sees the fact that we're still standing. I want you to think about that in your own life. Whatever farmhouse you're facing, whatever moment you feel like you're failing, maybe that failure is exactly what someone else needs. Maybe your cowardice is actually a form of protection you don't even realize you're providing. We're all connected in ways we can't see, and the ripples of our actions go out much further than we can imagine. I'm 92 years old, and I'm only just now starting to see the full map of the ripples I started in 1944. I think about the German soldiers again. I hope they find peace wherever they are. I hope the system that sent them to that loft in that farmhouse is gone forever. I hope the world has learned that you can't build a future on the bodies of boys. But I look at the world today, and I wonder. I see the same old arguments, the same old drums beating. I want to tell the young people, don't listen to the music. Don't listen to the grand speeches. Listen to your own heart. Listen to your own fear. It's the only thing that will tell you the truth. The system wants you to be brave so it can use you. Your fear wants you to be alive so you can be free. Choose life. Every single time, choose life. My grandson is at the door now. He's smiling. Grandpa, the mulch is done. You want to see? I nod and reach for my cane. I'm going to go see the garden. I'm going to smell the earth. And I'm going to think about the 15 men. I'm going to imagine them all standing there in the garden with me, seeing the fruit of our failure. We're a squad of ghosts, but we're ghosts who get to see the sun. And that's enough. That's more than enough. My name is Henry Lawson, and I was a coward. And because of that, I have lived a beautiful, long, and meaningful life. I wouldn't change a single second of that morning in Belgium, not for all the medals in the world. The evening air is cooling down, and there's a scent of blooming lilacs from the neighbor's yard. It's a peaceful suburban scent, the polar opposite of the metallic, sulfurous air of 1944. I lean on my cane and take a step toward the porch. Each movement is a slow victory against time. I think about the concept of the matrix again, the way it tries to flatten our experiences into something manageable, something productive. But life isn't productive.